Hello, everybody. It is September 21st, year 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is Professor Hamamoto welcoming into the chat room Infidel Apostate, who says that, yes, Vanderbilt, yeah, that's very much Tennessee and Nashville country. Yeah, absolutely. Nashville is a globalist city. It's been there. It's been that way since at least since the 1920s, which I'll get into. And welcome to Sean Lanane, All the Sun, Melissa, I'm sorry, Keelwerda. I can't make it out quite. Thermobsterful. You haven't heard of Tupper Saussy? Well, he's one of the, I think, really underrated contributors to this. And you can tell about his influence in this area of research, this area of inquiry. He's plagiarized relentlessly. Of course, he got his material from sources that I'm going to be talking about, but his DNA, Tupper Saussy's DNA, his research DNA, pervades so-called alternative research. And I'll try to explain. This is the question I came up with for myself. I'll try to explain why he went in this direction and the sources of his inside information. I think he had deep state, as the phrase goes today. I think he had inside knowledge of what we today call the New World Order. And as you know, I'm the primary and perhaps the only practitioner of New World Order theory from the academic world. So, of course, that's interesting to me, Tupper Saussy. And he's interesting on many other areas, too. If you've read the book, don't worry about it. You're going to find some interesting connections between Tupper Saussy linking our friend Taylor Swift. That photo, that pic on the YouTube channel there is not just clickbait. It's I'm going to draw the connection there between Nashville as a New World Order power center going through well, it originates during the Civil War and the immediate aftermath of Confederacy, but I'll get into that in a moment. Got a lot of material to cover. So welcome, Michael Charlie. Yes, greetings, Corky Goss. Good to see you again. And yes, we know that University of Phoenix is a diploma mill, so we have to treat all these whistleblower scoops with a great deal of skepticism. Rick Olson, yes, Rick Olson, and Renner Newton, welcome. How are you? I think that hits everybody. Oh, Piper Fogel, hi, how are you? Oh, McDuff, hey, bro. Yes, I should mention that I have signed on to Screaming Ospreys TV. We're going to take over from CNN. I have high ambitions, and we're going to have fun at it, too. Donnie O'Sullivan doesn't have much fun. You can tell he's hurting, but we're going to have fun, and we're also going to eclipse that group over there. And Harry Honkinson, yes, indeed. Oh, by the way, John and I are going to later do a Tupper Saussy dialogue. We're going to pull our information and go back and forth about it. So there's probably not going to be a lot of repeat because Tupper Saussy and what he represents runs very, very deep. So we'll get another angle on it. So if you want to go on the Patreon, by the way, you can get the Rulers of Evil PDF there and download it. And you're going to get exclusive information too and previews. For example, I did a 30-minute reading of this great book by Amber Fry. She's the girlfriend, or she was the mistress, as the term used to be, of Scott Peterson, who you might remember came up with an elaborate plan to kill his pregnant wife. Quite a story. And it's California. It's right around here, this area. Right, running through the Central Valley. And as you know, California is the capital of serial killers and all kinds of strange operations for reasons that I've already discussed. These are operations. They're not just one-offs. And as a preview, I'm doing a series. I'm preparing for it called Collegiate Gothic, and I'm going to be talking about criminality at universities and university towns. And here's one of them: University of California, Santa Cruz, Ed Kemper III. And your support of my Patreon helps me to get this material and really dig in deeper. And there's not a lot of repetition. There's very little repetition because I watch all the YouTube stuff and I read all these books and I explore areas that they miss here. So we're going to go through that. I have a whole different take on Edward Kemper that most of the people miss, including I think it was Lifetime Network or I guess it might have been Netflix that did a series on Kemper that supposedly tells the authoritative story of Ed Kemper, Big Ed. And most recently, I got a hold of this book. It's called A Dark Night in Aurora, play on words, right? Dark Knight as in Batman. And this is James B. Holmes. Remember the Batman Killer? This is the first book that I found. And I was pleasantly surprised how good this book is, because I was skeptical. It was written by a master of public health and MD, psychiatrist by profession, and I thought we were going to get a lot of psychobabble. But leaving aside his insights, I think from a forensic standpoint, he does an excellent job. And I'm going to share some of my thoughts with you in this book, on this particular book as well, and how it articulates, of course, with the New World Order theory. So let's move into Tupper Saussy. And again, as I mentioned at the outset, I'm going to try to bring together all these disparate sources. I want to talk about the origins of modern communications, right? That's radio. It's an often overlooked technology that we are either the beneficiaries or the slaves of, however you want to look at today with the internet. But it really started with radio, wireless, and then the telephone system. They're all kind of related. And there's one particular company that has been central to the development of all of this, and that's the Radio Corporation of America, which was really founded by Marconi. There's Italian Marconi and there's an American Marconi, and I figured somehow they screwed them out, just like Tesla and all the other geniuses, right? The true geniuses, not the people who took them over and took them out, and of course got both the credit and the wealth attached to it. But it's RCA, the Radio Corporation, are very, very important and largely today overlooked. And I've taught communication history. I've taught the history of modern communication at UCLA, School of Film and Television and Theater, just a 10-week survey course. And I begin with radio. So we're going to talk about that. And just as a preview, it's no accident that Nashville was put on the cultural map nationally and now internationally, right? It became, as the phrase goes, Music City, USA, because RCA put music studios there in Nashville. This was in the 50s because they wanted to create Nashville. They wanted to rebuild it along, instead of Confederate lines, right, which is about independence, agrarian self-sufficiency, and separatism from the New York globalist banker cabal. The South wanted to go in its own direction. I know this is not your typical Civil War type understanding of it, but I find myself highly sympathetic to the Confederacy. Not the FBI infiltrated neo-Confederates of today. Don't get me wrong on that, but the agrarian-based, self-sufficient, small farmer landowner economic system, but without slavery, right? And only the largest plantations, by the way, had the slave system in operation, which was on its way. It was going out globally as well as in the United States. The United States would have followed suit eventually. So RCA put its operation there to kind of bring them back. That is the South, not just Tennessee, not just Nashville, but the entire South, which was largely rural, and America in general was a largely rural society. And they did it through what? Radio. And they're doing it now through 5G, the internet, right? It does everything, including, surveillance, as we're finding out. Most of you who are in the audience, I have a quality audience here. You already know that, so I apologize for belaboring the obvious. So interesting, and I'm not going to review the Rulers of Evil because most of you, if not many of you, have already read it, and you can just go through it. It's free of charge. You can find it online. But I will talk about some biographical elements that are relevant to today's discussion about Nashville as a New World Order power center. He also wrote, and I had forgotten about this, he wrote a biography of alleged, and he was convicted, but he's the alleged, in my mind, and for many other people, alleged assassin of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., right? And I think a lot of us know from reading people like William Pepper, who is an attorney by training and has written 2 or 3 huge books. Incredible. I still think they're the best ones of all, William Pepper. But many other independent investigators say, no, it wasn't James Earl Ray. It was these assassins, right? Very similar to because remember, there's only 7 plots, right? And they use them over and over again. Very similar to the assassination of John F. Kennedy and other prominent political figures, of which Martin Luther King Jr., although he was a man of the cloth, had a very important political role to fill in American society. So that's so he was contacted. Tupper Saussy was contacted by James Earl Ray himself while Ray was in prison and saying, hey, I read your material. I know who you are, and I think I can trust you with my story. And he did. And that book is out of print, sadly, but you can find it. Find it on Bezos.com, who's the head of the retailer that ate the world, and pick it up now because I think it's one of those underground classics. They're going to shoot up in price, and I think Rulers of Evil is like a few $100s if you can find it in the printed form. So Tupper Saussy, this is an important point. Not very many people know about the Huguenot diaspora. These are the people of the Protestant faith who, well, I don't want to go into the church history, but they departed from the Vatican for reasons that right? It goes to Martin Luther, and it plays out through the subsequent centuries and even today. A lot of what we're seeing today being waged as a war. By the way, as I stated last time, this is the good news. The crisis that we're facing here, it's not because we have the power elite against us, we the people, right? We're the collateral damage. The real war is this civil war amongst the elites. So if we can hold out, they'll eat up each other. They'll negate each other. Just like we saw the other day with George Webb. The only people that were there were other cops and undercover people and news media taking pictures of themselves, right? So, this is a graphic illustration of this very point here. So, and that also relieves a little bit of a lot of the pressure to think that, they're really going to, they are trying, but they're doing it to try to outdo each other, to show how badass they are, right? So once we expose the plot lines, then it becomes more manageable for us, right? It becomes less of a crisis in our mind or chaos in our minds. And Saussy was one of the early people to lay out the plots. Hey, this is in the book, Rulers of Evil. This is where they're going, and this is why motivation is important, all important, right? I thought this book, Rulers of Evil, is also important because it acknowledges the fact, and this is even before people in academia, right? Not that they're the gold standard of foresight, but there was a native intelligentsia of the Confederacy. That is, people, men and women of there's a lot of great American writers, female writers, who come from the South. I mean, the northern cities were much more repressed than some of at least the modern ones that came out of the American South. But there was an intelligence, a native intelligentsia of the Confederacy, economists, not just writers of fiction, but philosophers, thinkers, and military people, and of course the Freemasonic intelligentsia, which I'll talk about now. The primary conflict that Saussy talks about in Rulers of Evil is the conflict between the Vatican, right? The Catholics. Remember, he's a Huguenot. He's a Protestant. His family were persecuted by the Catholic establishment and run out. And by the way, he didn't have any knowledge of that until someone casually mentioned, "Hey, Saussy, that's a really good Huguenot name," and that kind of intrigued him. And he asked his father, and I guess his father had really not, because it might have been embarrassing at the time. It might have been a mark of shame that you were being run out and targeted for removal and maybe elimination if they could pull it off. But his dad said, "Yeah, well, here's the family story, and the family stories are all important because family stories are history. They're the history." So that's when he started on his trail to educating or re-educating himself along the lines that are, at least the way I understand it, much more accurate and much more truthful about the American historical progression here. So it's largely a struggle in this book between the Vatican and the Freemasons, although he doesn't talk about them in quite such a disparaging way that he does the Vatican, right? He does have a sort of a jaundiced approach or view of the Freemasonic power in this whole state of Tennessee and Nashville in specific. And the reason that he has kind of mixed, that's what I'm inferring from the reading, mixed feelings about it, is that he doesn't write about this. This is my guess. I think Saussy got to learn about the Vatican, and he got to learn about the New World Order after either being acquainted with or being brought into the Freemasonic order in probably Nashville, which is a totally, when I say totally, I mean, like majority Freemasonic city, which I'll get into in a moment. I have some personal observations, like boots on the ground type experience with the Freemasonic establishment of Nashville, Tennessee. But anyway, I think he was brought in, and that's how, because remember, Freemasonry, I consider it an intellectual tradition, right? You may not agree with it, I may not agree with it, but there is no dispute that their worldview and their literature and the books, from Morals and Dogma and whoever else, and the people who take off on Freemasons, people like Manly Hall, but are not necessarily Freemasons. You cannot dispute the fact that this is a important, not just American, of course, but international intellectual tradition qua intellectual tradition, just as Marxism is, or Maoism, or free market liberalism, or humanism, right? It's an intellectual tradition. So he was brought in, he got to learn it, but I think he had a falling out or a disagreement with what the ultimate Freemasonic agenda is. And some of you may know, whether you believe it or not, that they believe in the higher power, but they don't mention until quite later, as you've advanced through the various degrees, they don't mention that higher power happens to be who? The fallen angel, Lucifer, right? And Saussy identified as a Christian, so of course that's not going to fly with him, right? So that's my guess, though. That's the tension I'm reading, and I keep going back to this book over and over. Oh, by the way, it was published in 1990. I forgot to mention that fact. This is not some new text that surfaced recently. It's one of those foundational books that everybody should read, whatever your political persuasion might be. Saussy mentions this phrase. He calls it these people who run these systems of power, these competing systems of power, and we want them to compete against each other as much as we can so that we can be left to live our lives and hopefully just like the five families of New Jersey and New York, they just kill each other. And then, the mafia is no longer, the classic mafia is gone, it's dead, because of all the competition at the top. They started knocking off each other. And that's what I see is happening right now, currently, right? So we just have to hang on, persist, and keep exposing the plots ahead of the time, being the spoilers, right? Spoiler alert. So there's a Nashville, as well as other parts of the country, including California, very much controlled by these unknown superiors. And these unknown superiors, John O'Loughlin calls them, appropriately enough, the Smelly Robe Club, right? Most of them today, however, wear very expensive tailored three-piece suits, and they're usually in the banking profession. They're the ones that you do business. You go into their office, and it's a really expensive desk, and there's not a single piece of paper on the desktop. Those are the unknown superiors. So Nashville, let me just give you briefly my realization, the degree to which, because I had read Saussy years before, but as soon as I got there, and I had a hotel room in downtown Nashville. So as soon as I checked in, I could just walk around. I went to the city center, and it's so obvious, all the architecture and the statuary, all explicitly Freemasonic. They have their brand right there, announcing it to the world. This is where we're at. This is what we're about. And I said, oh yeah, I get it. By the way, I was there primarily to attend an Americana music festival. I've been interested in, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, country music for a long time. One of the few people in my social circle who got it, who understood it, country, and has a love for it and has studied it. I'm by no means an expert on it, but even its more commercial manifestations, like the great trio recordings of Dolly Parton and Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt, as well as the Wilbur Brothers. I got a new CD of the Wilbur Brothers in the earlier days in the 50s of the Grand Ole Opry, which I'll talk about in a moment. I have an appreciation, a great love for it. So take that in, keep that in mind if you think I'm trying to dump on Nashville or the Freemasons or this region of the country. I have great affection for it. And I've fantasized many times about moving there. It's not going to be Nashville anymore, because it's now showing the sort of the end game of this globalization process that was put on that track by the RCA company. So it's not a good place to be unless you're a country western superstar, or a country superstar like Vince Gill, or even I think Taylor Swift has a token presence there in Nashville, because she doesn't want to completely lose her Nashville cred, even though her portrait has been airbrushed out of a mural down in Nashville. I think that they're kind of hurting. The establishment is hurting that she's become a globalist GLBTQ spokesperson, which I'll talk about in a moment. Since she started in Nashville, I heard, she started, I don't know if you remember, she started as a country artist and then went global. Someone paid her a visit and say, hey, listen, we didn't raise you just to be a local yokel. We have bigger plans for you. And she said, yes, sir, I will follow the agenda, because she is a monarch programmed person, I think. Speaking of monarch, speaking of butterflies, speaking of moths, right? The first album that Tupper, he was also a musician. He was a composer. He started as an advertising man, right? Supposedly he was so successful, he was able to retire at age 32. Most people don't even have their career going at age 32, but he was so successful, he was able to retire at age 32 in Nashville and pursue his true passion, which was music production and composing. And of course, if you've seen my earlier talks, I always return to this idea of sound and sound frequencies as being part of the mind control. This is not my observation, but I've returned frequently to this idea of how popular music embodies these frequencies, these carrier waves, in order to control politically the larger pop of the population, the pop people. From Tupper Saussy, even earlier, right, early days of radio, that was the beginning, to more recently Taylor Swift. So his first album had that monarch motif, and I don't have to explain to the viewers here. You know what the Monarch program is, and it was titled "The Moth Confesses," 1969. This was around sort of when the Beatles were still big, and they were making all these innovations at EMI recording studios, now known as Abbey Road. And EMI has that connection, just like RCA has that connection to the deep state military, mind-controlled establishment, right? And so, hey, what's good for London is good for Nashville. So he recorded that with, and he called his group the Neon, because it's the psychedelic era, right? The Neon Philharmonic Orchestra, with members of the Nashville Philharmonic. It's all arranged, orchestrated. I don't know if he had any musical skills, so I'll bet he probably got one of the studio guys to orchestrate it for him, because the orchestral musicians can only read notes. They can't arrange themselves, right? I don't think Saussy had any transcription skills, but he called himself a composer. Maybe he did. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that the album is monarch oriented all over again. And as you remember from your reading, again, I have an audience that is already on you've done your canonical reading, right? So you know about Kathy O'Brien, right? Transformation of America. And if you recall, and I had forgotten this until one of the commenters reminded me, if you recall, Kathy O'Brien she has a whole section in that book where she talks about Nashville and country music as being one of the key centers of monarch programming and sex kitten, that's her phrase, sex kitten programming, of which she, of course, she was one of them. And she she names names. And by the way, if you want to check this out without having to buy the book, but I would recommend that. That's a canonical book that we should all have read if we're going to be doing this type of work and trying to understand this new world order of ours. But if you short of that, you can look at this article. It's called Menthol Mountains, like mentholatum, Menthol Mountains, Ark of a Boulder, August 18. The title of the article is CIA Sex Slaves in Music City. And of course, Music City refers to Nashville. It calls itself Music City, USA. And she names names. I'm not going to go through it unless I have some time, but I've already burned 30 minutes of valuable broadcasting time. Okay, the single off of The Moth Confesses became a hit. I remember I guess I was a teenager by then. Maybe I was preteen, but it hit, I was a preteen. It hit the airwaves. I heard it on AM radio. It was a catchy tune, very well engineered, very slick. And it sold a lot of, back then they had these recording media called singles, 45s. They had a hole in it, and there was something called a record player. You put it on, you drop a needle, and you hear, "Good morning, girl." And the whole, if you listen to the lyrics, it's very Lolita. So who is the girl? What is this girl? Ostensibly, she's spent the night with a grown man, and he's greeting her to the new morning. She's a monarch, right? She's come out of her chrysalis. She's being initiated into this new world of perhaps sex slavery that Tupper Saussy might very well have had firsthand insight into. Whether, I'm not even going to imply that he was a participant, but there's a good chance that, given his business, advertising, music, his location, Nashville, and his understanding of deep state through his writing, right, Rulers of Evil, which came later. He was already on that track, right, but he hadn't published the book yet. I think there was a very strong Lolita, which is Vladimir Nabokov, right, the expatriate a Russian-American writer, novelist, who wrote Lolita. And you've either read the book or seen the movie or both. And that's Monarch Butterfly. And what did Nabokov do besides write novels, if he even wrote them? Remember, he's not native English speaker. And we know that Jerzy Kosinski, Polish-American writer, who did The Painted Bird and was a really hot novelist in the late 60s, early 70s. All my friends were reading, yeah, you got to read The Painted Bird. It turns out that those were all ghost written for him, just like a lot of people that we've talked about in the larger Osprey Nation network, right? Right. The names keep coming up over and over again. J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut and all those other, and Thomas Pynchon more recently. That's my contribution. So that's Nabokov. But his other claim to fame was that he was a butterfly expert. Right? He illustrated them. He had these huge, elaborate, and there's been books published of his original work, cataloging on the butterflies, right? Monarchs included, I assume. And he's respected within that science community of butterfly specialists, right? And monarch is the symbol of this. So speaking of, and I've mentioned it already a couple of times, let's go right into, and I might cut this off early, let's go into the Morning Girl sequence. I don't want to play too much of it because I might get a copyright strike here. But it might ring a bell if you were alive at that time, or if not, go to YouTube and watch the whole presentation. I just did an excerpt here. And then I'll skim through the early part where it's really a pop type feel good melody, even though the lyrics are kind of creepy. And then all of a sudden it goes Charles Ives on us. It goes atonal, and it goes dissociative. And I'll see if I can find that part there. And that's all done with the Neon Philharmonic. And that's part of the programming, by the way, right? Just being whipsawed between harmony and dissonance, harmony and dissonance. Let's check it out.
Morning girl, how'd you sleep last night? You're several ages older now. Your eyes have started showing how the little girl's growing now. Morning girl, morning girl.
Okay, so it starts out with those very creepy Lolita lyrics, right? And then there's a instrumental interlude played by members of the Nashville Philharmonic. And it's really carrying us along, just sweeping. It's like the Carpenters almost, right? By the way, I want to do a talk on Paul Williams, right? The guy who wrote We've Only Just Begun and so on. And some other songwriters from the 70s I think are very, very interesting. I'm going to try to produce some original material on that. So let's listen to the instrumental part and catch the dissonance. It just comes out of the blue. Wow. Sort of a frenzy. It sounds like something from Hitchcock, doesn't it? And by the way, I'm studying the soundtracks of Roman Polanski, his buddy from Poland, who was killed, by the way, at the Polanski house in Los Angeles. He died of blunt force trauma to the head, right? He was so as I'm telling you, I'm going to be looking more into these soundtrack writers and as well as pop music people. Jimmy Webb, I think, is another one that bears some scrutiny. Okay, let me remove that and put myself up there. Yeah, Norman Smith, strategic dissonance. He's a musician, he's a guitarist, and so you can pick it up. And someone earlier, I didn't get your name. I think the comment already passed. Someone said, "Ew, pedo music." Yeah, I think that's what we're listening to. So anyway, you get a little bit of the flavor of it. Watch it on YouTube to really absorb what it is. But I think I'm on the right track here. And further, just to further substantiate my claims here, guess where one of the first serious reviews of this album, The Moth Confesses, right, by Tupper Saussy, where did it appear? It appeared in the Harvard Crimson in 1969 when the album dropped, right? 69. The Crimson is the Harvard ostensibly student newspaper, right? Student, right? Who knows? Why would Harvard, the Crimson, why would they even be interested in a pop album, right? I know, by that time, the hippies and the counterculture had hit even the Ivy League, and there were people, hip guys and gals who on the student papers that would review concerts and records and whatnot and interview people like Joan Baez and whatnot. But I would think that one of the reasons is that the editorial staff was told, hey, you got to check this out. I want you to review this. This was at the same time that Professor Henry Murray realized was inducting people like Ted Kaczynski, right, better known as the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski, in his mind control experiments. This is in the book, Harvard versus the Unabomber by Alston Chase, required foundational reading, right? So they were into these mind control, and they were under contract, right? If you listen to John O'Loughlin, the readings, you know the history. So I won't, review that at this time. You might not be aware also that at the same time or a little bit later, there was something called the Harvard psilocybin experiment. It was run by none other than Timothy Leary, right? The bane of the counterculture, and his circle. And by the way, part of the Harvard psilocybin experiment went across the River Charles over into Boston proper, from Cambridge to Boston, and touched down at Boston University. And one of the people there who carried out the experiments on students at BU was one of the mentors of guess who? Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, right? Or AOC, as we lovingly know her. That was her mentor at BU. What is one of the main campaigns that AOC is waging in the halls of Congress? Yes, legalizing and legitimizing and spreading psychedelics through the society. AOC is really big on that. And guess what the parent, if the name comes up over and over again, guess what the parent institution, the university that's really pushing this hard? Yeah, of course. But our own beloved Johns Hopkins. And I mention this is because while we are, rightfully so, justifiably, importantly so, while we're looking at all the different vectors that we're being hit with, the whole psychedelia movement is being ignored, right? That's why I'm mentioning here. So let's keep an eye out for Johns Hopkins, AOC, and the psychedelics, because they want a bunch of hallucinating sheeple out there, right? They did it through radio and television and the internet, but they have to complete the circle with the hallucinogens, for especially for people who aren't interested in the internet. People like me, I use it as a tool, but I'm not. I haven't been absorbed into that matrix yet. It could happen. So let's watch out for them. That's why Harvard was interested in Tupper Saussy, because they knew what he was up to, and it was part of probably some. I would be delighted if one of you here in the chat room found out that Tupper Saussy or those people were somehow connected to intelligence. That's why I bring it up here, because we're collectively coming up with all these interesting connections, not just interesting, important life and death connections. Remember also, and these flashes of not flashbacks, but these flashes of historical information come to me when I'm preparing these talks. But yeah, that album dropped in 1969, right? The Moth Confesses. And so I looked it up. I said, wasn't that around the time that Bob Dylan, the voice of a generation, as he was being hyped up to be by Columbia Records, run by a Vanderbilt, right? John Hammond Jr. and all those people. These are all, American royalty, right? Yeah, that's the time that Dylan went Nashville. And sure enough, the album came out, Nashville Skyline, 1969. And when I first heard that, and I was listening to music as an avid student of music and as well as fan, and I was a big Dylan fan, and I still am to a certain degree, although, his last 30 years are kind of a blur to me, truthfully. But I said, wow, is that Dylan? He doesn't even sound like Bob Dylan. And I remember, because I used to read all the music magazines, Hit Parader, musician, player, and listener, downbeat, whatever it is, whatever's out there, I read it, religiously. He said, oh yeah, I stopped smoking, and it's amazing how different you're going to sound if you just quit smoking. My suspicion now is that, well, was that really Dylan? Dylan might have died in that motorcycle accident, right? We never knew about it. So, and here's another factoid for you. As to why Nashville, why Dylan would go to Nashville. Well, Joan Baez followed him shortly thereafter, and she wound up recording several albums in Nashville. Now, you remember, well, you may not remember, but Dylan and Baez were in the folky circles, were synonymous with civil rights, right? Especially Southern civil rights, right? When it starts hitting Boston or New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, and all these riots are starting to, and many of them, by the way, if not all of them, were fomented by the usual suspects, right? Then it becomes a little dangerous. So Nashville had to be made out to be a kinder, gentler place that's not the source of all this, racial strife. So Joan Baez and Dylan were sent down there, and of course they have the great musicians. Don't get me wrong. We know that part, but that was another step towards reintegrating what we call today now the New South, right? Atlanta, GA. That's one of the reasons why CNN put their HQ in Atlanta, not in New York City or Los Angeles, or in the old days, it was Chicago was a huge media capital. Yeah, they put it in the New South. So this is all part. Remember, Dylan was, I think, a lifelong contractee of Columbia Records, and maybe it was Old Scratch himself that made him sign on the dotted line. I've seen those videos just like you have, right? And Baez went to different labels. And, I gave a talk about her as being someone who's part of this monarch conditioning through her father and his network, Professor Alberto Baez of Stanford University. Most of you know the backstory on that. So what was the goal here, right? Reintegrating the South into the one world system. And this is what Saussy was seeing, and that's what he revealed to us in 1990 in The Rulers of Evil, right? But before that, as early as the 20s, we were seeing this rural, that is country people, electrification project being coordinated out of DC and the bankers in New York and Wall Street and London, of course. That is, we're going to get all them hillbillies, and I'm using their term, all them, hillbilly, all them ignorant country people. And I say that ironically because they're far from ignorant. We all know the story about the country mouse and the city mouse, and the country mouse gets over on the city mouse, right? Okay. But they had this huge investment financed by Wall Street and the City of London in electrifying the South and making, all them, ignorant people who can't speak correctly. They can't even say Grand Old Opera. They have to call it Grand Old Opry, right? But it's, by the way, do you think that they were being ironic and making fun of themselves? No, I think people in New York, well, them ignorant hillbillies, they can't even say Grand Old Opera correctly. They have to say Opry, which I've been to. I never was at the original Ryman Auditorium, but I went to Opryland, and it's a huge theater. And that was quite fun. And it's a live show and a broadcast too, which I'll get to in a moment, because the Grand Ole Opry was founded in 1925 by an insurance company. No, not AIG, but today it's part of the AIG network, by the way. It was sponsored by a regional insurance company called National Life and Accident Insurance Company. And insurance companies are not insurance companies, they're bankers, okay? The fact that they pay out if you lose an arm on the job, because they were doing industrial, and then they went to, middle class, white collar type people, that and our house burns down and we'll get some pennies on the dollar payout. So we have an affection for it, but they're about banking, right? Using your premium in order to, doing the fractional reserves deal, as we all know about. So Grand Ole Opry itself came out of this insurance company, and its radio station, I don't know if it was wholly owned, but it was the call letters were WSM, like, George W. Bush, WSM. And they said the call letters stood for We Shield America. And they had a little shield logo that we protect you because we're an insurance company, not a banking company. And we're definitely not connected to the New World Order. And then from there, you got all the best musicians in the region. I mean, fiddlers, guitarists, singers, of course. We know them as singers, but let's call them sangers. And production people, even the great Chet Atkins, instrumentalist, a virtuoso by any standards. By the way, Chet Atkins, who was the head of the art, he wasn't the president, but he was the guy in charge of the operations at RCA, and he had executive decision-making power, right? But he was a Freemason. Okay, I think a lot of the studio owners were connected in that way. Just to kind of put it in perspective. And by the way, a lot of pop musicians, including black musicians, of course, they were in Prince Hall. They Count Basie, Duke Ellington. I'm claiming Miles Davis was read into a Masonic lodge, but they all had that connection. And it wasn't just for fraternity and brotherhood. Okay. So as I mentioned before, RCA said, okay, we've got the radio deal going. We've got WSM. It's a huge, powerful station. WSM today, it blankets the entire North American continent, especially in the evening when the AM waves really carry. And of course, there's internet. They have these live internet feeds that you can, and I listen to them, especially the Grand Ole Opry, because the Grand Ole Opry is still around, by the way. You can hear it every weekend. And so RCA established themselves, the recording studios, Nashville, famous Studio B, where all the people from Elvis on up, and all the way to Taylor Swift. I don't know if she records there now, but they've all passed through the famous Studio B. Not coincidentally, RCA, the headquarters, the laboratories, that is, maybe not the headquarters, but the research laboratories of radio technology is located in Princeton, New Jersey. Isn't that the hometown of Princeton University, which is, right, let's say it, yeah, House of Orange Nassau. That's the Princeton institution right there. That was F. Scott Fitzgerald's alma mater, even though he's a college dropout. And other people, you know about the Institute for Advanced Studies, Einstein later on. And so it's a very important research institution. And they had the foresight to say, hey, we're going to go to Nashville and we're going to bring them in. And for generations, we're going to be able to exploit this region for our own political, economic aggrandizement. And they'll never figure it out. Boy, were they wrong. Not all of us got programmed. Some of us went off the reservation here. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit and show you some graphic illustration, just to know that I'm not just making it up. I did put some work into this. Very quickly, I'll go through these. Here's the Tupper Saussy book, right? Here is America already by 1930s. They were already huddling around the radio. That was the center of family life. And I'm a radio freak. I mean, I even listen to the old, before my time, my parents' generation, I like to listen to the old television shows, the broadcasts, the music. And I'll buy, the CDs that are taken off the broadcast, the great early Frank Sinatra. The great stuff was on, Tommy Dorsey band on radio across the country. So it really brought the nation together culturally, politically, economically. And now they're going to hand us over, kit and caboodle, over to the NATO establishment. That was the end game, right? So that's why this is important. This is not just a piece of historical trivia for any of us. And okay, just to show how seriously these people are, here's the guy. This is a general. He's the head of RCA. It's a military operation, just like the National Institutes of Health was always started as conceived of and today as a military operation. So was RCA. And RCA had a parent network on radio and then television called NBC. So they had what's called vertical integration. So they can control programming. As I'm not going to dig too deep. And remember, I taught media history, but I don't want to go, wonk on you, or I don't want to geek out on this. Here's a very important character. Again, he was a honorific general during World War II, especially David Sarnoff. He's the guy supposedly that picked up the radio waves from the distressed, I guess it was I think it might have been I can't remember. Yeah, I'm sorry. I won't guess because someone can correct me here. But anyway, that's the story. The point is that he legitimized radio and the importance of it by being this amateur radio bug. And there used to be a lot of kids, even when I was growing up, a lot of kids who were into amateur radio. But he sort of demonstrated the fact that, hey, this is a technology that we all need for our own protection and whatnot. The Titanic, I think it was, either the Lusitania, I think it was the Titanic when it went down. So that's General David Sarnoff. There's a bigger picture. So he was the real brains behind the operation. There are these other gentlemen down here, like here and here. They're all PhDs in electronic engineering, okay, that are in Princeton, New Jersey. Probably they might have had faculty appointments at Princeton or not. So RCA, very, very important in New World Order politics, way before CNN. And here's the Research Center. This comes from a book published by RCA itself, 1941. That's the Research Center in Princeton, New Jersey, RCA Research Center in Princeton, New Jersey. Already a huge complex. I wonder what it looks like now. Hopefully one day I'll be able to go see it and tour the premises. Just to show you a little bit about Tennessee and its centrality to what we're seeing today, the Pizzagate, and we're hearing about, the Clinton Foundation and Haitian refugees and all these people. They're just plowing the field that was already cultivated by people like her. Her name's Gloria Tann. I think it's Gloria, Tann. She was the head of the Tennessee adoptee. I'm not getting and I'm not going to look at my notes because I'm running out of time. But she was the head of the state adoption agency, let's say. But under that cover, does it sound familiar already? Right, CPS, Child Protective Services. Under cover of that state agency, she was selling poor, but I'm saying po. She was selling po chillins. That means children. She was selling po chillins to rich people. So they would even abduct. She'd even have cops and other people who worked for her snatch kids right off the street. And this is like in the 30s and 40s and up into the 50s. And she ran forever. And she was in cahoots with the local mayor, the police, all this stuff. I just ordered a book. Some scholar said, "Hey, I'm going to write," and so I'm waiting for it. It's going to be delivered. Thank you, patron. You allowed me to buy it, and I'll report on this book as well, on this person. And she had a international clientele of the elite, including, do you recognize that lady? Yes, that's Joan Crawford. And those are her two adopted children, including Cheryl Crane is her name. There she goes. And then she later wrote the book Mommy Dearest, was an expose on how Joan Crawford would beat her up and abuse her, knock her head on the ground, and just humiliate her. I mean, it's just, I don't even like to talk about it, but check out the books, watch the movie starring Faye Dunaway, directed by Frank Perry, who I met of all places in Tokyo. And I asked him about Mommy Dear. I wanted to find out what was going on in behind the scenes in the movie. He was very pained by that whole experience. That's Frank Perry. But that's Joan Crawford. She's been acting since probably the late or mid to late 30s. I have her early films. These are all pre-code, before censorship. They're really nasty. But she's a very talented dancer, total entertainer, and a high-level escort, right, as a lot of them were and are today. So this is the children that were adopted by 10. And we talked about Nabokov earlier, right? There's his monarch butterfly. That's the great author right there, Vladimir Nabokov, the butterfly expert, the author of Lolita. Looks like a really nice portrait that might have been published in Life magazine by Yusuf Korsh. And here is our own Taylor Swift, right? And guess what? Where did she pose? Let's check it out. Oh, yes. That's Taylor Swift in front of a monarch mural. So we're going full circle here. Okay. So I'm not bugging out, pun intended, when I talk about monarch. I'm connecting the pieces here. So let's end up with Miss Taylor Swift, and maybe we'll go in on her for a full episode one day. I had the pleasure of watching the Netflix original, and you know all about Netflix and what they do, what their function is. And it's not all owned and run by the Chacoms, by the way. It's run by British intelligence. Okay, let's get it straight. But I watched Miss Americana. It came out in 2021. I'll recommend that you see it. I think if you're a member of Netflix, Prime, or whatever it is, you can stream it. It's part of the lineup there. And they take you all the way through. It's a real heart-rending story about her. I shouldn't make light of it, but I am, because it's manipulative. It's manipulating our emotions from all her struggles, body dysmorphia. Her parents are really cool. They're really young too, and they're very bright and energetic, and they seem normal. I don't know what happened to Taylor Swift, but so she goes through all her struggles, and she's got a big beef. It might be a fake beef with Scooter Braun, the producer Scooter Braun. And if you're not familiar with Scooter Braun, he's the guy that discovered the Canadian phenomenon that we know is Justin Bieber, right? Remember Bieber fever, right? He's the ephebe. Some people, maybe not Scooter Braun, but his own peers at a celebrity roast. I mean, Snoop Doggy Dogg was a celebrity roast of Scooter Braun and was hinting very strongly that there's a certain quirk of Scooter Braun's sexuality to be on YouTube late at night watching Justin Bieber videos when he was a preteen. And then Scooter Braun went up to Canada and brought Justin Bieber and made him into a star. So maybe Justin Bieber is also a monarch creation. We haven't heard from him lately. I wonder why. So check out Scooter Braun. And also another globalist, a mind control engineer, is one of the most prominent producers of modern times of the last almost over 10 years, getting on 20 now. His name is Max Martin, and most of you don't know about him because we're being diverted into, Laurel Canyon, those people, the Beatles are, Paul is dead, and John Lennon would blah, blah, blah. So you're over, that flack is thrown out so that you don't learn about Max Martin, who's better known as Carl Martin Sandberg. He's a Swedish national. He's responsible for most of the hits that your children or grandchildren have been hearing for the past 20 years, right? From Britney Spears, Baby One More Time, 1998, the Backstreet Boys. In fact, his first song was I Want It That Way, right? The Backstreet Boys. Wow, that sounds like rough trade to me. I Want It That Way. NSYNC, It's Gonna Be Me, on and on. And his work is exceeded only by two other individuals, John Lennon and Paul McCartney. So he's way up there. And he's one of the people that helped bring our friend Taylor Swift up to prominence. Okay, and as I told you before, I think some of the sane people in because they're being pushed out gradually by the globalists down in Nashville. But some of the same people that remain and still have a voice in the Country Music Association and the Museum of Country Music, and I went to it all. I visited all of them, right? They demoted Taylor Smith. Or Taylor Swift rather. They painted over her face, and they put Brad Paisley on there, which is a much better choice because unlike Taylor Swift, he can really play guitar. Right. So now she's no longer a country legend. She'll just have to be a monarch-controlled, quote unquote, sex kitten. And to show you, to underscore the fact that she had a function in a plot line, a hackneyed plot line. And I'm going to do a spoiler for you here. Spoiler alert. The film ends, Miss Americana. The very last scene is when Taylor Swift throws in her lot with the GLBTQ movement. Yeah, she's going to hook up GLBTQ. She's hoping, and her handlers hope, that people who are the eugenicists, who don't want people to have heterosexual relationships, which will spawn, babies, right? Population, right? That's really the whole impetus behind the GLBTQ. They don't care about G, B, L, T, or Q. They do care about us breeding ourselves out of existence. So she's been ordered to go in with the GLBTQ, and we see that ceremonial handoff at the end. It looks like RuPaul is there. She's got a black GLBT guy advisor, fashion coordinator. Just like the guy that was the right-hand man to Anna Wintour, forgot his name, big guy, I have his bio. I haven't read it yet. And RuPaul, which is being lionized for Mr. He's the embodiment of the Emmy experience with Drag Race. So that's where Taylor Swift is, and that's where all the cultural engineering has led us from the early days of country music and RCA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the rural electrification route, and the whole rise of Nashville. And Tupper Saussy was right there, and he's a brilliant guy. Can't take that away from him. He was there to see it, to experience, and he sent us, you and me, a message in the model, right? 1990 publication, right? Go to the Patreon or go find it online. Rulers of Evil. Thank you very much, Tupper Saussy. We owe you a huge debt of gratitude to foiling the plot, as it were. It's out of little old Nashville, Tennessee, out in the South, right? Those people, most Americans, for foreign viewers, audience here, they have this stereotype of the South being unsophisticated, rural, hillbilly. Man, do they have it wrong? Who's playing who? And the South will rise again because they're not buying any of the garbage that we're seeing here today. Even with decades and decades of RCA programming, you can throw Taylor Swift at them. No, they're just going to paint over her picture and put a native-born son, right? Mr. Brad Paisley, right? That's his real name, by the way. Brad Paisley, the master of the Telecaster. And they gave him a music scholarship at I think it was Carleton College. And they said, yeah, we're going to cultivate our own native son talent. This is true Americana. And the New World Order will never take us down. So I'm with you right there. Okay, maybe I'll make it down to the South, permanently. It won't be Nashville. I'm thinking of LA, and that stands for not Los Angeles, but you got it, Lower Alabama. All right. With that, ladies and gentlemen, my friends and chillins, right? Peace out, right? I'm just a po' boy, long way from home. Bye-bye. Good night. We'll see you later. Take it easy.